So I was maxed out. I was not fully funded. I was maxed
You're fully
out.
loaded.
And then, the craziest thing happened when I bought my first house. So this was back in 2000, I don't know, whatever, 6, 7. And then, the market started to shift. So not only was the market shifting and like foreclosures were happening, but guess what? I found out that I bought a house on a freaking World War II bombing range.
Wow.
And there's a lot of people who are really on the fence right now. Man, should I buy? Should I rent? Should I hold off? And they're probably listening to somebody that they shouldn't be listening to instead of getting the cold, hard facts. So I love to see us kind of go through some of that today. I know each and every one of us is a homeowner, has purchased multiple homes, and has our unique set of experiences. And hopefully today we can help somebody get fully funded when it comes to buying their first home.
Well, and that's really the first step to
Yeah.
become fully funded is
Love
owning
that.
real estate. You have to own real estate, and the easiest way to do that is to buy your own home. And I think that a lot of people look for reasons not to do it. And some people are scarred. Think back in people who bought in 06 to 08, and the market dipped and lost all their equity. And unfortunately, a lot of people lost their homes at that time. And that's not that long ago. So that's fresh in a lot of people's minds. And it's easy to get nervous. Like, is this the right time to buy? Is this the right time to buy? And that's the one question we hear all the time. Is it the right time to buy? And the reality is that you can't answer that question. That is not a question you can answer at any time in any market whatsoever. And I believe that because it all comes down to you and your personal situation. If you're really trying to own a home and you're renting, to me, it's always the right time to buy.
Oh yeah, and even like with culture, right? Like I know, like I was brought up in, my mom and dad didn't have a home, right? And in Hispanic culture, is like, you take over the grandparents' house and everybody keeps living. So it's not a culture of even buying. So a lot of the times, I think like even just the cultural aspect of it is like buying a home seems so out of reach when really, when you really get into the process, it's kind of almost too easy, if you will.
Let's do some basic math, right? Let's just say that, you make a decent income and you're able to, put away $1,000 a month in discretionary income. So at the end of the year, I mean, I'm pretty decent at math. I hope you guys are too. What's $1,000 at the end of the year? How much you got in your bank account?
It's 12 grand.
12 grand, right? So, if you got some money you're sitting on, you buy your first home, let's just say you buy a, $350,000 home, 3% down. Let's just use round numbers. That's 10 grand, right? So you put 10 grand into a home. You can historically see appreciation over, a period of time. Conservatively, you're going to earn somewhere around 4 to 5%. Yeah, we've seen some crazy years, 20-25% increases, but like, again, let's do 5% of 350,000. That's 17 grand. So your first year, that 10 grand that you put in turned into, you still have that 10 grand in equity, but now you got another 17,000 on top of that at a conservative 5%. You'll never get that just sitting in your savings account. So even if buying is even the same as renting or even more expensive, you're still going to get a lot higher of a return than keeping that money in the bank. I don't think people grasp that.
Well, we already established that I think it's a lot easier than people think to buy a house. You mentioned Hometown Heroes. There's a 1% down program for people in lower income brackets. But the reality is a first-time home buyer can typically buy a house with as little as 3% down. And so obviously if you see that, you're like, oh, I need to save 3%. Market fluctuates. Maybe you get some seller credits. Who knows? You take advantage of even county DPA programs are very attractive for a lot of people. So, but there's always the dark side. And if we always touch on the good and we never touch on the dark, then we might miss it because you just dismiss it. And so you think your first experience buying a house, your first house versus your second house, I think it's important for you to relate your experience and then why you still were so committed to real estate and how that turned out for you.
Wow. Yeah. So when I moved down to Florida, I'm from Jersey. I heard about this thing called pre-construction. They did a real great job in advertising, hey, buy this house, right? And I said, hey, Dad, you sold your house in Jersey. You got a little money in the bank. Why don't we invest in real estate here in Florida? And I'm like 18 years old and I'm like a go-getter and I want to make some money. So I somehow convinced my dad to go and buy this pre-construction mortgage or pre-construction house that was like the second lot in this community or something like that. Or it was a townhome community, and they were like pre-construction pricing. It was a $235,000 townhome at the time. And I convinced my dad to give me 20% down, and we got that house. And pretty crazy experience because I was caught in a whirlwind. And well, two things happened. In hindsight's 2020, they say. I actually don't even know what that means, but it sounds good.
You know what 2020 vision is,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
So can you? What is hindsight? Is 2020?
Well, it means like, and when you have the benefit of hindsight, you have perfect vision.
Oh, okay. It just sounded good, so I'm glad I said the right thing at the right time. But I remember when I bought that house, two things happened. Well, number one, I wanted to buy my first nice car, which was a BMW. So I said, "Hey, Dad, I want to buy a BMW." My dad is super conservative dude, like great guy, you know, always had good credit, money in the bank, but like he cared about taking care of his family. Have a nice house, but he would have a $20,000-$30,000 car. Always a new car, but he didn't care about having the expensive stuff. So he was like,
So you weren't completely like your dad then.
nah. And he was like, that's not what I taught you, son. He's like, you want to buy a BMW? You're gonna give me every cent I can, or every cent back out of that house. I gave you 20%. So I ran down to the bank the very next day because, you know, when I get something in my mind, I'm determined to do it.
ZB.
And I got 100% financed, interest only loan, pulled every dime out of that house and handed my dad a check for like 50 grand. I was like, thanks for the money. I'm going to buy a BMW now. So I was maxed out. I was not fully funded. I was maxed
You're fully
out.
loaded.
And then, the craziest thing happened when I bought my first house. So this was back in 2000, I don't know, whatever, 6, 7. And then, the market started to shift. So not only was the market shifting and like foreclosures were happening, but guess what? I found out that I bought a house on a freaking World War II bombing range.
Wow.
A World War II bombing range. So there was this middle school that was right down the street called Odyssey Middle School. And all of a sudden one day they were on the news and they're like, bombs are found in the ground of a middle school. Like, it was like the news thing or whatever. Long story short, Army Corps of Engineers went out and surveyed the land, found like scrap metal from bombs that literally it was a bombing range. So they would test bombs. They would drop bombs from the airplanes and then like some of them wouldn't explode, just for whatever reason, because it was testing. So there's this big class action lawsuit. So yeah, that $235,000 house during the foreclosure meltdown went, and I was in a World War II bombing range, went from $235,000 to $80,000 overnight. I was 19, 20 years old. I think on the first episode we talked about when I filed bankruptcy. That was all wrapped into it. But man, yeah, it was kind of discouraging, but it didn't discourage me from my next purchase because like you can't control everything, right? I think the lesson in life is always like, you can only control what you can control. So move on and continue to make better decisions. It wasn't a bad decision to buy a house. I was just caught in the middle. So
it was like the the perfect storm, like
Yeah,
Murphy's
yeah.
Law. Yeah. But you still bought a house. I don't know. I always forget about the World War II bombing range because my next question was like, what is that house worth now?
Well, the house is probably worth $300K, but actually on the topic of being fully funded, that particular house, when I bought it, I think my mortgage was like, I don't know, it was like $2,000 or something. And it was a 3-bedroom. I rented out each bedroom for $750. So actually I almost like lived in that house for very, very like less than what I would have paid for rent. So yeah, if you're buying your first home, I think you like, did you just touch on that?
Yeah.
Like you could maybe like offset the cost of like having roommates or stuff like that, but look for a way to hack the system, get fully funded, right? Have that, house arbitrage where you could potentially live in that home for little to nothing when you're buying your first house.
Love that.
Yeah, but I think it's experiences like that, which is why people are so like, oh, I'm waiting for the market to crash, because some people bought a house for $230 and then it was worth $80,000 and they short sold it and let it go and they get scarred by it. But the reality is, if you look at a 15-year period of real estate, you don't lose. Like, think about that, because if Zach decided to hold on to that house and maybe keep renting it out, maybe do a long-term rental and have his mortgage offsetted, okay, he would have went maybe 10, 15 years, got some of his equity back and been able to sell his house.
The house might have been paid off by now. Who knows?
Might have been paid off. He might not even have been sold it, or leverage the equity that he now had back in that house to go purchase new real estate. And so, like, okay, yeah, that sucked what happened back then. And it was a byproduct of, bad loan products out there, bad management in the secondary market, terrible management in Wall Street. But the point is real estate always bounced back. And so if you look at everything in like a 2 to 3 year time frame, yeah, you might lose. Like if you bought last year because you needed a house, okay, maybe this year you might have not seen 4 to 5% equity increase, but you will get that because you're thinking the long term. But if you're like, oh, I'm going to buy this and flip it, which a lot of people had that mentality back in 07, 06, is that, oh, I'm going to buy it and I'll just flip it. I'll do my stated loan before the interest rate, my option arm hits in. I'm going to sell the house. Well, yeah, that's bad business planning, and you will lose if you think that short term. But real estate long term, it always plays out for you. So a lot of people like that, even I know, that kept their house through all those years. Yeah, it sucked. It sucked that you had a mortgage for a house that was worth half of what you paid for it.
Yeah.
But
it's worth way more now.
It's worth way more now. And if you were smart, you're probably sitting at a 2% interest rate.
Yeah.
So not only do you have your equity back more than what you had before, you're sitting at a 2% rate. You can stay in that house for cheap, or you can move on, rent the house, because now you have this low payment, this big asset. You can loan against that asset. You can do that to buy more property, to do more things in your life. So when you're thinking about real estate, you got to think about long-term real estate. That's where you win. You don't win in short-term, you win long-term.
Yeah, I think for me, that's like the biggest thing for me is because, I go back and I look at my first house that I had and I sold it. But I remember years later going down the road and
like, why did I sell it?
Yeah, why did I sell it? Right. But my story is more, I was 23 and in love when I bought my first house with my high school sweetheart, and we put 40 grand down on the house. And I think like after 5 months, we ended up breaking up. And at the time I hacked it, right? I was like, all right, let me get some roommates in. Like, we're keeping this show going. But then when my roommates like started like, oh, I'm going to move out, I didn't stop and think, okay, maybe I can get more roommates, or I just kind of
rent this out long term.
Yeah, let me rent this out long term. Like the things that I know now, where I just got scared in that moment, and they're like, oh, roommates, and it was like my cousin and my best friend. So maybe I was like weird about bringing other people in, and I just sold it. But I remember a few years after that, going and just be like, oh, I wonder what that house, like going to go buy a new house and going to check what that house was worth, and it was like up 120,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I was like, man, if I knew what I knew now, I would just never get rid of it.
So that's the hindsight 2020?
The hindsight 2020 for
so
sure.
what are some other lessons learned, for you guys? Like, one lesson that I learned through this process is, because at one point I was up to like, I think I owned 7 houses, right? And I had this grandioso idea that I was going to sell all these homes and I was going to invest in multifamily real estate. And I think one of the lessons I learned was like, don't cash out until you're ready to cash in. Meaning, like, I didn't have another property lined up, and I think I've got emotional and I've got attached to the idea of like my next step in evolution in real estate. But like, I sold property. Like, there was a home in Avalon Park that I picked up for $105,000, a townhome, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna sell this, make 75 grand. I'm gonna go turn this into and do another investment. Man, I know I just probably ripped through that money in my bank account. So like, if you're thinking about continuing your real estate, I would not sell a house and just sit on that money, because you're going to figure out a way to spend it until you have that next real estate play there.
Yeah,
I think
I was just going to say, like, consult with people that actually do it too, right? Because like you kind of said this earlier, like if you go to your parents or your uncle or something, like if they just had one house their whole life, they're not going to tell you to keep that house and go get the next one, right? And most people will go and like, oh, my dad, like the famous meme of the dad going and messing up the inspection or whatever, right? Like, you got to also talk to people that have 7, 10 houses. What was their play? Mm-hmm. And not just because your family members stood in one home, that's the necessary the play.
Yeah, your sphere makes a huge piece of that. Like for my experience in my first house, and in terms of lessons learned, I like to touch on that too. But I kept looking at houses, and I had to be in 32746, which is Lake Mary, right? I couldn't be in Sanford, because that's stigma. I want to be in Lake Mary. I needed 2,400 square foot. Don't know why. I was single, but I needed that house. And a lot of it was, my dad's influence. My parents have always been, be in a good neighborhood. I don't care how broke you are, be in a good neighborhood. If you have to sacrifice on eating out, be in a good neighborhood. And that's great, and I do agree with that. But like one day I don't know how I ended up in this neighborhood in Sanford. I'm like, oh, this is nice. This is a nice neighborhood. Sanford's not like this. And I went on Zillow and I saw the house. I sent it to my agent. We went and saw it. I put an offer in, and it got accepted. And the days where it was owned by Fannie, I got 3% seller concessions. I got paid what consider now is nothing for the house. But what I say is like, I got nervous again because when I start going through that inspection report, I'm like, okay, the AC is do I got to replace the AC unit? Do I got to do this? And I was at the time dating my now wife, and she said, because her dad, one part of it was I went to their house and they have a nice house. And I'm just like, why do I need this huge house? I mean, they don't have it's not a tiny house. It's a good sized home, but it was very well done. And granted, he's like a master construction guy. He did all the work himself. But she's like, if you start pulling apart the ceiling, you'll find things wrong with this house. And like, my dad's great at fixing everything. And then like it like settled me down to realize what's a little maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay, I replaced my AC unit 10 years ago and it's still working just fine now. I eventually got a new roof. Everything is perfect. And so who you're consulting with is so important.
Yeah.
If you're just like, oh God, you got to get out of here because there's a crack in the cabinet there and the seller's not going to pay for it. It's like, you know what I did for my appraisal? I went in before the appraiser got there and like fix a little pipe thing under the sink and like put like a plexiglass because there was like a dent in the drywall in the laundry room. It wasn't water damage. I put a plexiglass in there so I'd pass my FHA appraisal inspection.
Smart man.
And then like it took, I think it was like 7 years later, we took the plexiglass off.
I want to talk about a controversial topic.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Along the lines of what we're actually talking about right now with like staying the course, right? And all that. You know something that nobody talks about right now? Like when I say nobody, I mean nobody. I don't know if it's like something people are thinking and then they don't want to stir it up because they're worried about something. But like, what about all these people that bought in the last 18 months or 24 months or 36 months and they got that sub 4% rate before things, shifted to where they are at today, and they paid $50,000 to $100,000 over their house to get it. Now prices have settled down. Let's just say here in Central Florida, maybe depending on the neighborhood, 10%, 15%, maybe, right? Things have adjusted a little bit. But what about the person who needs to sell, to get out of their house for whatever reason, but's now upside down instantly? How come nobody's talking about that?
So I think a big part of that is because, okay, so one, I think that leads into people thinking we're going through like, oh, prices are dropping. Well, they're not dropping. Is that people are not spending ridiculous amounts over what the original value was and what the asking price was to get the house. So those people who bought those properties and paid over it, I would imagine that a lot of them were cashing out real estate in other states.
They plan on staying here for a
while.
while.
They plan
on
coming in.
Anywhere.
They're just like, I'm going to pay over it. I know I'm going to lose it. I might never see that money back. Or maybe it'll take me 5-10 years before the market completely resets itself. So I think that's a lot of what it is. And I do think you are seeing people that are wanting to move and get out of it. And you'll see like, okay, they bought it. I just saw one recently. They bought it for $340 and now they're selling it for $360 a year later. Like that 20 grand is just going to cover their costs and their realtor fees. So I think that those people purposely did it that way. And then also with a 2%, 3% rate, they're probably not rushing to leave anyway.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of people made these moves during COVID, and they looked at the home buying process a little differently, right? They were willing to spend the extra 50 to 100 grand because the home probably had everything they wanted. So it's like, okay, it has the extra room that I could create my office in now. So they looked at all of these things, and like to your point, it's like, all right, I'm going to stay here for the next, like maybe this is my forever or 10, 15-year home. So I'm going to get that upside. And again, it's, who did they consult with, right? Like they knew that it's going to go up. This asset has the opportunity to go up. So let me just get into it now.
So all of us being a product of our environment and going through, I've purchased multiple houses, each of us. What are some things that you guys will avoid the next purchase?
Well,
great question.
I feel like, I bought my house in 2012 and I didn't buy my second house until, honestly, the pandemic, right? I went on a trip to North Carolina. I was like, I really like it here. And then 4 months later, we bought a cabin, and I was like, I'm buying at the height of the market. Like in my mind, I'm even saying the things like, I'm buying at the height of the market. I might lose some equity, but I also bought at 2.75. That was my rate on my second home. And then like 2 months later, second home rates went through the roof, and my value jumped up another 20%. And so I can't really say what I would avoid. I think that looking back, I would have avoided the objections that I had to not buy property. I looked at property in Deltona and I'm like, it's maybe 7%, 8% return and rates are high. And now those, $90,000, $100,000 properties are worth 200 now. So I think that if I had to go back, I would have bought more property. I would have hesitated less on what I did buy after the fact.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that, waiting and listening and, you know, like we alluded to it early on, it's like it's not that hard. It really isn't. Like, yeah, you have to take calculated risk, but it isn't that hard. So I would have just keep going, you know, probably try to make it faster. Like I got Pablo stuck in my head every 2 years, buy a house. And like, you know, it just got me thinking.
But so he was also the conservative guy when I was growing up too. So I don't know. I mean, and we all change, right? That's hindsight's 20/20, like Zach said. Like, you're always going to look back and you're going to know exactly what you needed to do. Because I guarantee you in 2009, 2010, if people like us sat here together, they're gonna like, I would have waited to buy after it was too crazy, right?
Yeah.
And now we're saying, well, even if you did buy, if you just held on to it long enough, you would have gotten your return. So you can't, you know, you can't make the right decision in that moment. That's why I said there's no such thing as whether it's a good time to buy.
Yeah, when you're ready.
So we're gonna do a little segment right here. So we're all licensed MLOs, mortgage loan officers.
Thank you.
And this is the
What is that?
buying your well, hey,
Malo.
people probably don't. Do you know what?
Mother
We're talking about buying your first home, pitfalls to avoid. So let's break out some mortgage knowledge. If you're listening to this podcast today because you're considering buying your first home, what are some things that you should avoid? Let's maybe do 2 each. You know, just easy little stuff like don't deposit cash in your bank account, right? So let's spit out 1 or 2 things that you should avoid if you're looking to be a first-time buyer.
I got one thing that a lot of people make this mistake. It's insane how often this happens. Buy the house and then buy your car. So often you get the job, you get the raise, you got the money coming in, and you want to go buy the BMW. Stop. Buy the house, and then when you're settled in, buy the car. Because what good is a nice car without a driveway to park it in?
All right, so give me one more.
Understand credit in terms of your credit limit versus your balance. So people say, oh, I pay my credit cards off every single month. Well, that's great, but the bureaus don't look at it that way. So they're going to look at what your limit is and what your balance is, and they're only going to know that at the close of your credit card statement. So I always say, if you have to make a payment in the middle of the month, do it. But you should never let your balance of your credit cards exceed 30% of your credit limit for that particular card, because that screwed me up too. Like I got an Amex. I got my Platinum. That you know, I was like, oh yes, I got this great card. First month, I used some business charges. I got like $6,000 on it just to get the signing bonus. Well, I didn't know that because it's a charge card, you got to pay it off. There's no limit. So the way Amex reports it is whatever the highest balance is in any given month is your credit limit. So I literally looked like I had opened a credit card, maxed out a $6,000 credit card, and my score dropped to like a 640, and I had to go FHA instead of conventional because it was cheaper and it made more sense.
Yeah. You got any?
It's good. Mine's just gonna be credit, man. Like, you know, we like monitor your credit. Like credit is so important when it comes to buying a home. It's not the end all be all, but it sets you up and puts you in a better spot if you have that credit. So like, you know, when I bought that house like two years ago, I remember when I first, thank God that it took me like 3 offers to buy a home. But when we first put the offer in, my credit was like a 646 something. So I had to go FHA. Thank God by the end of the time, we were able to go conventional. And mine's was a simple, I didn't pay $5 on a credit card. Like the interest came on the credit card and I missed the payment and I just didn't think that I had any payment. So that's why I missed it. So it's simple. So I just think budget yourself, check your finances.
And I would say like also something to avoid is like, is thinking that you have to wait. So timing, right? Like credit, like thinking, oh, I don't have good credit. So I'm going to wait until I have good credit. If you pair up with a good loan officer, that loan officer is going to be committed to getting your credit up there quickly. They're going to run tools like credit score analyzers, offer things like rapid rescores, stuff like that. So like, don't think that you got to do this alone and like, wait, if you're teetering at a 580 credit score, you might not even realize that, hey, I might be able to get a loan with a 580 credit score, or there might be that small little tweak. So like, definitely avoid just waiting and trying to figure out yourself. There's professionals who get paid to try to help you get a deal done. Make sure you do that, and then also avoid thinking that you need to have like all the money and everything figured out before you go through with the pre-approval process. I've got some people that only have 75% of their funds saved, but we put together a plan and say, listen, you know, you're about, you know, you need 10 grand, you got 7,500. How much money can you save up? Okay, great. I'm going to pre-approve you today contingent on you having funds for closing. It's going to take you 2 to 3 weeks to find a house. And it's going to take you 30 to 45 days to close. And, you know, depending on the contract that you write, that's 2 months out. Can you save another $2,500 from now to closing? Can you sell a small piece of jewelry you have in the house? Can you offload a couple things online? You know, can you get a gift? Do you got some cash lying around the house? Like, don't think you have to have all your ducks in a row before you start. Or even the last thing is like, oh, my lease, you know, we're recording this podcast in June. My lease is not up till October. I'm going to start this process in September because I want to move in October. No. Actually, if you know anything about how mortgages work, let's say I pre-approve you today. We're sitting in June. It takes you 3 weeks to find a house. You're closing, you know, or you go under contract in July. You set your first mortgage payment you go under contract in July. You set your closing for August. Do you guys know when your first mortgage payment is? October 1st. Right? I said that right. I didn't mess that one up.
No, that was good.
October 1st. So
you've done this before.
I'm starting now. I'm not waiting till September. And too many people wait, and then it just doesn't work out. And then they don't got enough time. They got to renew their lease, and they end up just wasting money.
The reality is you'll plan your vacation a year in advance,
Yeah.
but you'll go 2 weeks before you got to get a house and start the process. Yeah. And what Zach said is true. It's like, you know, plan it out with a mortgage professional. And that's key there, right? Your banking LO, your Rocket Mortgage people, like they're not going to help you out in that aspect. Like you need to work with somebody who actually understands, like lives in your area, understands the market, and then can go through that. But if you don't plan, you know, I've seen where it's like, oh yeah, you knew you were going to buy, you know, start the process 6 months. You waited to now to get your credit pulled, and then you find out your score is too low, or you have to pay off some debt, or it wasn't exactly where you needed to. Whereas if we had another month or two to work through this and get you prepared, you could have been ready now. And so like, okay, yeah, I don't want my credit pulled too many times. Like enough with that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like one, your Credit Karma, your online scores, all they tell you is that you didn't make late payments. Those scores are not real mortgage scores. I think that's a big misconception is, you know, algorithms for mortgage scores is the lowest score you can have is a 350. I think the highest is an 850.
350, huh? You seen one of those?
I've seen close to it, unfortunately.
Ouch.
But you can't have 1,000 credit score. Like it doesn't exist. Or my credit score is in the 900s. Okay, maybe with that system that you looked at it, but not from a mortgage perspective. These algorithms are built to judge you based off your ability to manage a mortgage payment. That's how they're designed. So let us figure out what that score is, figure out what you qualify for, and then if it's not what you need at the time you're going to need it, this is what you can do to prepare yourself for it.
That's the biggest thing is planning, right? What is it? Fail to plan to fail. Like just put the plan in place. Like once you put the plan, the pieces start to move in your favor. But if you never create the plan and you just create excuses, you'll stay in that same spot.
So what would you guys say are some of the easiest parts and some of the hardest parts to going through this process? So we convinced you got to buy a home, right? And then now you're ready to go and you're in that pre-approval phase. You're under contract, any of it, whatever. What would you guys say are some of the easiest things and some of the hardest things that you're going to come into contact with?
The easiest thing is, I think, what people think is the hardest thing. I'm sorry.
Can you tell us what it is?
I'm skipping ahead
Come
here.
on.
Is you're gonna look for houses and you're gonna have all that indecisiveness and figuring out if you want to put an offer in and negotiating and getting on a contract, and it could be discouraging at times, but it's totally worth it. You're gonna have your home inspection, and it's gonna tell you if repairs need to be made to the property and if you can negotiate with the seller, or you might be like, I can fix these myself. And then you're gonna get your loan disclosures, and for some reason you're gonna sit on them for a day to sign them, or you're gonna not provide that W2 that we need because you've been working there for 10 years, or I make so much money. Why do I got to give you a bank statement? Like you think that those are the easiest ones, but the biggest thing is that it doesn't matter if you're a multimillionaire or you make minimum wage. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, they don't care. You're the same person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's no difference between you. Stop it.
It's a computer program.
Great. Congratulations. I'm actually very happy for you. Like I truly am happy for people who found success in their life. But I believe you. Like you tell me that, I believe you, but they don't. So let's just give them what they need. Go on your bank, log in. It's 2023 as we record this podcast.
Yeah.
It's 2023. You have online banking. You have an HR department. Just send an email. Just get us the docs, because your loan process goes 10 times faster if you just sign and provide us the documents we need up front so we can get you through it. I don't know why, but it seems like that should be the easiest, but it's the hardest.
That's actually what I was going to say. Like, easiest thing is get online, do the loan application. It's like a 5-minute process. Hardest thing is getting your documents. Like, it's wild, right? It's wild that we have to chase people on a daily basis to turn in your docs, and the process got much simpler. I mean, what do you need? 30 days pay stubs, last 2 years W-2s. Most of you guys have access to a paycheck portal, or paychecks, like ADP. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. People think they got to provide tax returns. A lot of times you don't even have to provide tax returns anymore. Nope. That's the hardest part, is not being lazy when you're buying a house. And, I always use this analogy, right? It's funny because I would teach this class called Mortgage Mastery. And, I think at the end of it, I say to agents when I teach them about, how to make the process smoother. I said, what do you think is the number one factor in closing a loan smoothly and on time? Ryan,
hey,
what is it? Motivation, right? And it's like the motivation. Like, are you actually motivated to buy this house? And then, it's also because these days everything is just digital currency,
I was
right?
waiting for you to get to this.
Yeah,
you use the money bag analogy.
Yeah, it's like if I had like a duffel bag, right, and I like unzipped it like in the movies, and there's like stacks of $100 bills in there, and I'm like, hey, you want this $400,000? All you gotta do is send me your bank statement.
They would figure out. They would crack the code.
Like, here you go. Like, I got this over here. But because people don't have that physical, there's nothing tangible. The house is tangible, but they don't have the house yet. Yeah. People get held up and they just refuse to send you documentation. I'm like, hello, you're trying to borrow $400,000. When in your life are you going to need $400,000? No, send me a bank statement. Don't black out any of the account numbers. Don't black out your name. I need to know it's you. Provide me all pages, even the last page that has no blank statement. Yes, I'm sorry if you're watching this. You gotta do these things if you want to have a smooth process.
Well, my favorite thing is, I still can't understand this. People will call you, never met you before in your life. They don't even know what you look like. You don't know what they look like. They will give you their social security number, but they will black out the account numbers on their bank account that shows up on every check they put in the mail.
Yeah,
bro. I will never understand that. But I think a lot of it too has to do with just. A lot of people just don't understand it. I mean, you could try to explain it to them, and I would challenge anybody who's in the process of buying a house or looking to buy a house. If you don't like what's being asked of you, ask why, because a good LO will explain it to you.
And they don't want to hold things up. They want to.
No, we want to close.
They want to get paid. They're not gonna I always say, I don't want to ask you for this document. It's not like I want to ask you. I'm like, it's what's required to close a deal. I want to make money.
Clients all of a sudden think that the loan officer is against them. Like, no, we don't get paid until you close this deal.
Now there are some times where maybe what's asked of you is not as detailed, and I would encourage anybody watching this, whether you're a consumer, you're an industry professional, don't get mad if somebody doesn't understand. They do ask the questions, because it's sometimes it's vague, hey, send me proof of funds, right? And then somebody takes a screenshot and then they get frustrated with you. And that's what exceptional communication is about. In our industry, it's so important, where you're like, hey, I need this and I need this, and this is why I need it. Provide me this. Don't cut out this. And sometimes you have to just spell it out for people, and that's okay. So don't get frustrated if somebody's not understanding. Like you said, I think ask questions, seek to understand, not to judge in this situation. Yeah. Does anybody have any cool stories about buying real estate or anything that they've done special?
I mean, I can give you personal experience. I mean, I'm not like a real estate mogul. I own a couple properties, but I told you my cabin thing where I was like, thought for sure I was buying at the top of the market for sure. But I'm sitting on equity now. So yeah, it rents out and it's not quite paying for itself, but we picked an area where we knew we wouldn't get a higher return because that's where we wanted to be at. But I bought this condo in Deltona, and I originally bought it actually for a team member because they were having issues. And they're not in there anymore. They're not on the team anymore. But I've had 3 tenants in a year, and I've never gone a month without having rent coming in. And I can't understand it. I put it up there. I get 17 applications. People need a place to live. And I think it's a different issue altogether, which is how hard it is to get an apartment if you're a single mom or you've had something on your record, if you've gone through some aspect of your life. But literally the last 2 tenants I've had have both been single moms, and they're hustlers. They pay on time. One paid 6 months in advance. I mean,
oh, wow.
It's crazy, and it's gone up in equity too, which again, I didn't think was possible. And I'm sitting on a sub 3% rate, so I'm never going to sell it.
Word.
Hello.
You got a cool story?
I don't know what's considered cool. I only have one house. This is my second house. I only have one. So like, I'm excited to add more. I think that, you know, the mindset, my mind is your sphere, right? Like being in mortgages for the last 3 years and being around a lot of real estate agents, you know, just opens your eyes to real estate. So I'm excited to buy more. It's crazy how like bored I got with the first one. Like, I don't even want to do more stuff to it because I'm already like, I went in my first house and I spent like 10 grand and like 24 hours with lights and all type of stuff to make it feel home. But now I'm just kind of over it, ready to go on to the next thing.
I think you kind of have a cool story with this last house you bought that was like, you happen to know the realtor, so like it pays who you know, and like you probably saved a bunch of money on that. Like,
yeah, so like my closing cost when I got my initial disclosure was like 32 or 35 grand. I went into that house at like $14,000.
Yeah.
Like, because like originally it was going to cost me like $30,000, and then it pays to work for a mortgage company. So I got a little love there. I got my employee benefits there. Because I work with hundreds of real estate agents, it puts a competitive environment for real estate agents to want to work with me. So I ain't even set the deal. An agent came up to me like, hey, I'll give you back 50% of my commission if you work with me. And they're actually a top producing agent. So I was like, I'm not going to say their name so they don't have to offer this to anybody else.
Yeah, realtors hate when they hear about those rebates.
Yeah, man.
and they also hate when you admit that you worked with somebody else.
Oh, yeah. So I won't say it. A lot of people know who it is, but they gave me back some of their commission too. So like literally it cost me half of the initial price to get into the home, really just because of my resources and connections.
And
so.
we knew the agent, the listing agent.
So
it pays to also like, so I made a phone call. I was like, hey man, accept this contract. So like the reason why I'm bringing, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I don't think that I would have gotten that home if it wasn't for the agent that I used and the loan officer that I used. Because Zach was my loan officer, but it just so happened to be that.
Just for the record, I did the work, but go ahead.
You're the man behind the scenes. But yeah, because you knew the listing agent, you're able to get on the phone, which I think, which is kind of cool too, because he's like, hey, the other person's going to put this much over.
Yeah.
You know, what are you willing to do? So that definitely helped
there's
me out.
actually a lesson in all of this, and I'm glad that this actually came up because I'll give you guys a personal experience. And if you're listening to this, thinking about buying your first home, consider what I'm about to tell you. I was talking to a client 2 weeks ago. He goes into an open house. He meets an agent. He basically says, yeah, I'm looking around for real estate. I don't know that she asked him if he had an agent or not, or maybe he gave the vibe that he didn't. But basically, he gave off the vibes that he's willing to work with that agent that was hosting in the open house. And then, like, 2 days goes by. I asked the agent, like, have you heard from so-and-so? Like, nah, he kind of went ghost. I haven't heard from him. So I reached out to the guy because actually I pre-approved him, like, almost immediately that day because he was considering putting an offer in there. I was like, hey, man, so-and-so hasn't heard from you. Like, are you going to put an offer on this house? Like, like that listing is also represented by their team. It's a really good chance that if you work with that agent, you'll get that offer accepted. Like you hadn't said you're working with an agent. It's like, well, actually, I'm talking to my friend who's an agent, and he's going to write the offer for me. I do a little bit more digging, and I found out that this agent is a buddy from high school. I looked him up on Zillow. He sold one home in the last 12 months. I find out that he's part-time. And the sad story about it is that this guy didn't get the home because he wanted to work with his friend. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't want to work with your friend or loyalty. I'm a big loyalty guy. Like, I get it. You want to feed everybody. But at the end of the day, like, the harsh reality of this business is who you work with matters. So if you're looking to buy your first home, the couple things you want to do is, like, make sure that agent is actually in the business selling real estate full time. They're not a part-time agent in this market. They've got connections. It is a big deal. I cannot stress you because listen, we're in mortgages. We can pull up our pipeline. We see agents who take 3 months or never to put people under contract and people who take 3 weeks. Who you work with matters. Not only your real estate agent, but your loan officer, your team matters more than ever when buying your first house.
Well, I said I lost 2 offers prior to getting that third offer. Well, what I didn't mention was that the first 2 offers were with a different agent, right? And the agent was actually my cousin's girlfriend at the time, brand new into the industry.
You wanted to give her some love.
I helped her get into the industry and place her on a team. And me knowing real estate and knowing real estate agents, I said, if she does not make a sale in her first 3 months, she's going to leave the industry. So I was like, hey, I have a lot of agents. I actually created the deal with her first. Like, hey, if you give me X back, we could do this. And we did it, but we lost 2 offers. Then that's when I realized, like, hold on, maybe in a strong market, you need a strong agent too.
Yeah.
So that when I flipped the agent, next offer, I got it. So
Yeah.
it works.
I think we can agree, and I think it's safe to say that the first step to becoming fully funded in your life is to buy a house, even if it's just one, even if it's just your primary, but it's to get off the fence. There's no good time to buy, right? In terms of like answering that question, because it all has to do with you. But if you're renting, like just make that leap, because that house will never lose your money if you're willing to commit to that investment.
And I just want to piggyback on that real quick. A lot of the times when we go out to buy our first home, we're thinking of our forever home, and we're renting right now. And we go onto the market to buy a home, and we're looking at this luxurious market, thinking of our end career, and we want this home, right? Take a step back. And how about if you went into a condo or a townhouse that was similar to what you have now, and then you can use that as a stepping stone to eventually get what you want, right? So look at the long road when you're looking into real estate, and not saying that you just have to get this luxurious forever home right off the bat. There is stepping stones to where you could go into that first home, then use the equity to go into that second home. So open up your mind perspective on that.
And then, like you said,
What did I say?
the most important piece of this all, you want to become fully funded, you want to purchase a home. Who do you got to work with?
You got to work with.
Home first, Lindsay.
Who you work with matters.
Yeah, who you work with matters. Your real estate agent, your mortgage professional.
If you want to plug us, you can.
Yeah.
Nah,
But if I did want to find more information on real estate and mortgages, how would I learn from the Blez?
I mean, follow me on IG. That's where I drop some content. Zach_the mortgage broker. That's Zach_ the mortgage broker. ZACH. It's Zach, not Zach. _ the mortgage broker. But wait, I don't get to tell my cool story?
You have a cool story?
Yeah, we'll leave it for the next episode.
Yeah, let's leave it for the next episode, please.
No, come on.
All right, our producers are saying to say the story. Unfortunately, our producers are telling you to tell the story. So tell
I'm
the
like
story, Zach.
yin and yang, bro. You're telling me not to do it. He's telling me to do it.
Well,
I
think our producers trump us both.
I'm actually listening to Gabby.
Yeah, our producers trump us. So tell the story.
No, actually, I don't have a cool story.
No, tell it. No, you want to tell
Don't
it. You're going to call me
like
tonight at
a
10
kid.
o'clock.
He's blushing like this right now.
Yeah.
Why
Give us a
am I
story.
being red? Why am I
Tell
getting
the story.
red? Well, no, because it's just like.
It didn't take much.
And then all of a sudden,
And I bought a house, Ian.
well, so it's like
I know where you're going with
I'm
this,
trying
yeah.
to go with a fully funded segment.
Yeah,
you know?
okay.
So
Alright.
you got to be fully loaded. You know
Fully
what I'm saying? See, I'm getting red. You're starting to settle in.
I'm trying to relax. I'm trying to listen to
I'm
your
getting
story.
bored, so let's hear the story now.
That's good.
That was not nice.
That
Anyways,
was very nice. I
no,
like it.
no. So like, I got a
No,
cool
no,
story.
let him tell the story.
All right. So I got a cool story about buying a property recently. We talk about the cabins. That's what kind of reminded me of it. And I think on the first episode, our audio wasn't working, so we didn't get to talk about my Lambo arbitrage situation. But I'm into cars. I like cars, so I kind of figured out how to hack the matrix, right? So one of my purchases was actually fun, and it encompasses a couple of things. So I've got a love for watches, and I got a love for cars, and I also got a love for not paying for any of these things,
Yeah.
right? So I remember I bought 2 Rolexes. This was years ago, and at that time, this car came along. I always wanted a G-Wagon, right? And I had a G550, right? A new 2019 G550, nice car. But if you got the G550, you got to have the G63, man. Remember the first time I pulled up in the G550 with you and Bavik? I was like, yo, look at this thing. I just put some wheels on and stuff. But I had to have the G63, the V8 bi-turbo, the sick one, and I just kept getting teased by it. But I basically got a phone call, and they were like, hey, we got a G63. The guy can't qualify. He fell out. Do you want to buy this car? And the price tag was hefty. It was $200,000. And I was like, whoa. At that time, it was the most expensive car I've ever considered purchasing. And
It's almost as much as your first house.
yeah, and I didn't want to spend any money on the car, right? So I had these 2 watches, and I was able to basically let go of those 2 watches that I paid $20,000 for. I turned that money into $50,000. They needed a $50,000 down payment on the car. So I bought this $200,000 car, put $50,000 down. I was into $150,000. So I enjoyed some luxury timepieces. Now I had this G63. Drove that G63 for like 8 months, and then I basically talked to Christian. I said, "Hey man, we're buying up these cabins. Like, is this the new play or whatever?" He's like, "Yeah, man, I'm under contract." I'm like, "Well, if you're under contract, I need to get under contract." You know, I like FOMO. So I found this dope place. Sent it to Christian. Hey, is this legit? What do you think I should do? He's like, "You should pull the trigger." I think that property was like $512,000. Yeah, $512,000, and I needed 10% down as a second home. Well, I didn't want to spend any money for the house, right? Because I'm always hacking, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. So I'm like, all right, well, I've enjoyed this car. We know that I'm going to want to buy a new one soon anyways. The car was still worth what I paid for it, so I was able to drive that car for free. I sold that car for $200,000, took that $50,000 in equity out, put that down on the house. Then I lived in that house or I didn't live in it. I used it as a vacation home, and I rented out what was not there. I stayed there maybe 3 weeks over an 18-month period, and I was able to sell that home for $740,000 18 months later. So you too can buy a house for free if you listen to me.
Well, yeah, because it started with the watches.
Yeah.
So you turned $20,000 in watches, which seems like a lot of money, but you realize
I turned $20,000 into $250,000.
and it's all an investment. And I think that's the key here, right? Is that you stop looking at luxury in terms of possessions as showy displays, and these are all investments.
A way to build wealth.
A way to build wealth.
And enjoy it along the way.
And you didn't want to tell us that story.
Yeah.
Well, I'm fully funded.
Right.
You're fully
You almost
funded.
deprived our community of that great lesson.
So anyways, guys, this is another episode of Fully Funded. For more episodes like this, definitely join us on all major platforms and YouTube, and we'll see you guys next time. We're out.
Bye.